Janet, I think. We've got Di.
Hello, I'm just trying to get my video on. Hang on. Should be coming. Oh, hang on.
You've done well. We've got you.
Very good.
And hey, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to submit to us this afternoon.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Janet, and I'm a member of Women's Liberation Aotearoa. Di Landy and I will be presenting for our group today. Women's Liberation Aotearoa is a left-wing feminist group promoting women's rights and women's democratic participation in Aotearoa. We also support the International Women Human Rights Campaign, and we work in partnership with Mana Wahine Kōrero. We are opposed to the Supplementary Order Paper 59, SOP 59, which would introduce sex self-identification as a means to change the registered sex on the birth certificate. Our principal concerns are the harm to women's and children's rights and the loss of integrity of the birth certificate as a truthful and reliable legal document. Our submission makes 7 key points. 1, there needs to be greater clarity over key concepts and definitions, especially sex and gender. Sex is a biological classification which is related to potential reproductive capacity. Gender is a social construct derived from sex-based stereotypes. Dominated sex in the legislation refers to gender, but the Supplementary Order Paper often conflates it with sex. At present, only a small number of people have a nominated sex on their birth certificate. With sex self-ID, there would be no limits or safeguards on the use of this legal fiction. Further, the Supplementary Order Paper proposes that there should be no record of any changes that are made on the sex on the birth certificate. This means that the integrity and reliability of the birth certificate as a factual record of someone's sex at birth will be lost. 2, elevating gender and a nominated sex over actual sex on the birth certificate reinforces sex-based stereotypes which restrict human self-expression and women's freedom. 3, sex self-ID threatens a range of single-sex provisions that are vital for women's safety and well-being. Section 46 of the Human Rights Act allows for the, quote, provisions of separate facilities or services for each sex on the grounds of public decency and safety. However, in the SOP, there is no guide for how a service provider could provide those protections. Section 80 is very unclear as to how reliable the birth certificate should be regarded in terms of what someone's sex is. 4, sex self-ID will weaken the social contract where female-only spaces such as toilets, refuges, schools, rape crisis centres, prisons, changing rooms, counselling services, medical facilities, sports teams, social gatherings and political caucuses are widely respected and accepted. Predatory and vexatious men will feel emboldened to enter these spaces, and women, girls and service providers will lose confidence to challenge them. 5, there has been insufficient consultation with women leading to this, and if the legislation is passed, there must be meaningful consultation with a range of women's groups to find out the effects of this on women and children. 6, the proposal to allow multiple changes of gender identity compounds the problems and undermines a key premise of this legislation that gender is innate and unchanging. 7, there are serious implications for children's health and safety arising from a medicalised affirmation approach, which is already quite common in this country. This will be strengthened by having children who can self-sex ID on their birth certificate, and is already being strengthened by the fact that there is a nominated sex for children allowed. In Women's Liberation Aotearoa, our ability to meet as a group and develop our ideas as women is very important to us. There are lesbian women in our group for whom the ability to express their same-sex attraction free from harassment by males is very important. There are women who felt that they could have been boys when they were children and are now living happily as lesbians. It was the ability to socialise with other lesbians and feminists that helped them to feel comfortable with themselves. There are parents and grandparents who are concerned about the gender ideology that is being taught to children in schools. There are women who have faced harassment and sexual violence from men, including as children and including an assault from a man dressed as a woman. So all these women in our group, we know from experience how important safe female spaces are, and I'm quite sure everyone on the panel knows that too. We support the human rights of all people, including trans people. It is the human rights of women who have been overlooked here and must be urgently addressed. We recommend scrap the supplementary order paper and scrap all proposals for sex self-ID on the birth certificate. Hold a commission of inquiry about how to balance the rights of women and trans people. Consult widely with women. Remove provisions for children to have a nominated sex on the birth certificate. Retain the code that indicates that the sex has been changed on the birth certificate. List women's spaces where single-sex provisions must be respected. Ngā mihi, and now I pass over to Di Landy, my co-presenter.
Welcome, Di. Go for it.
Kia ora. Tia kene te Māori o te Wāhine, tia kene te tape o te whare tangata. Tia kene te Māori o ngā tamariki, me ngā mokopuna. Ti hei Māori ora. Ko Di Landy aho, and as a sovereign woman, I'm reserving my right to address the Crown. Today I represent Women's Liberation Aotearoa, WLA, and I'm a founding member of Mana Wahine,Kōrero, the sister group to WLA. I'd like to remind the Crown of its obligations under Hei Whakapūtanga near Te Tiriti or Waitangi. It is our belief that this bill breaches both. Trans rights are human rights, nothing more and nothing less. You will never comprehend the deep respect and love I have for transvestites and transsexuals. I was 7 years old when my 6'2" neighbour Sandy pulled me out of a burning house fire. Sandy saved my life. Excuse me. In the early 2000s, I ran and funded a women's boarding house in Wellington where we housed a pre-op, socially transitioned man, Ashley. She was able to live in the role of a woman and participated in the daily house rules, tasks and rituals. Both these people are kuemati now. Rest in peace, Korua. And I'd like to remind the Crown that we are partners. There are close to 900,000 Māori in New Zealand. Interviewing 27 is hardly a representative number to be basing a law on or claiming this speaks for all Māori. The lack of fair, unbiased, factual consultation is appalling. The ill will surrounding this bill is true to this fact. We all know the self-sex ID clause was inserted after consultation with the public had closed. I've been on several PAR in the last couple of years and not one has any idea of this bill or that this change is happening. This clearly shows me that this is not coming out of our PAR, but being taken back to the PAR via our cities and universities. My kaumātua and queer do not need to be educated. They do not need re-educating. They are my mentors. They are my teachers. Under Section 71 of this bill, a birth certificate and any proceedings shall be received as prima facie evidence of the truth of the information it contains. Not all Māori have access to their PAR. How will these tangata find their whakapapa once this bill is enacted? I'd like to know, only rhetorically, how the Crown will keep accurate, accessible records of violent men who have changed their birth certificate. It's okay, the Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt couldn't answer that either. Shane Winter, Blaine Maney and Laken McKay, these men have all committed heinous crimes. All Crown departments have sold out and been captured. As a case in point, the Department of Statistics no longer collects sex data. They collect data according to the YUCK principles, which are not law anywhere. Finland, Germany, Sweden, UK and Spain have all said no to self-sex ID. Yet here is New Zealand heralding it in without a care in the world for the far-reaching ramifications for women and children. Self-sex ID is the last card in a hand that has been dealt to a small minority. Without proper political oversight, and more importantly, without public consultation. This bill cannot be disconnected from other legislation, which is aimed at strengthening the idea that gender identity trumps biological sex. That idea is already causing harm in relation to the safety of women in prison. And remember, New Zealand imprisons more Indigenous women per capita than any other country in the world. There has already been a case of a trans person threatening women in the Christchurch Women's Prison, and indeed we hear about from another submitter of the 3 pregnancies. And then there are the ways children and young people are being treated in clinics and hospitals, as if their current sense of gender identity is more important than their precious bodies. This is the biggest game of willful pretend I have ever seen. You can never say you were not told what is coming. And I hope you all have a very good reason for putting women's sex-based rights at risk. The recommendation, throw this bill in the bin and start a proper consultation with all of the public. On your watch, in your name. Kua mate ahau. Kumatu ahau.
Well done. A spade's a spade. Can I? I've got a couple of questions for you two. Deborah first.
Thank you, Janet and Di, for your submission. Di, I'm familiar with your name and some of the work you've done, so thank you. I was just interested in this in I'll get the correct name, Women's Liberation Aotearoa, the group you're involved with. Can you just tell me a little bit of the history of the group and how many people are associated with it or actively involved in it?
Was that to Janet or to myself?
To either of you. Oh, there's 2 organisations, I appreciate. So maybe if Janet could answer that one.
We have about 60 members currently. We formed, I can't remember exactly when, it was about a couple of years ago. Some of us were in previous groups before this. And our particular kind of identity compared to other groups is that we do believe, we are left-wing, we believe in social equality and human liberation, and and we are very committed to democratic processes.
Thank you. A quick question from Luisa.
Tēnā korua, really a supplementary to Deborah's question about membership, and I ask it from a place of, I guess, being a life member of the Māori Women's Welfare League and their submission that they accept trans women to be members. So I'm just wondering are you advocating for cis women's spaces, or do you require a birth certificate of your members? So people have to prove they're a woman biologically based on their birth certificate to join your group?
I actually reject the notion of calling me cis.
Yeah, we don't accept that concept, so that question doesn't really have any meaning to us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for your submission.
Thank you.
And you put a lot of work into it, so well done.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to our next submitter.